So there are four things that I virtually never do. If I can avoid them at all costs, I will avoid them at all costs. I do not play board games. I do not play card games. I do not go fishing. And I do not play golf. And they're not only because there are many reasons why I've claimed that I don't do these four things. One of the many reasons is like board games are spelled B-O-R-E-D. They're super boring. They're so frustratingly boring. Card games, same kind of thing, involves math. Not very good, not very quick with the old cribbage card games kind of math thing. Fishing, you've said, but enjoy yourself. You're sitting in a boat, enjoy the sun. I would love to do that. I love doing that. I love sitting in a boat doing nothing. But if you put a fishing pole in my hand, and all of a sudden there's an objective, there's a task to do, and you've just ruined something that was really fun. Same thing with golf. Golf is I remember on my parents' fridge, there was a little magnet that said, golf is a nice walk spoiled by a little white ball. And that is 100% correct, because every one of those things, people say, well, board games, card games, just like enjoy the conversation. It's about hanging out with people. And I would say, great, that's awesome. Let's just talk then. Because once you introduce a game, once you introduce the objective, once you introduce a task, I'm a little bit competitive. And so what happens is I ruin the evening. That's what I'll do when it comes to board games, when it comes to card games, when it comes to fishing, when it comes to golf. I get a little bit competitive and I don't have fun. And someone says, well, just have fun. I'd say I would if I could, but I know myself. And so what I do is I avoid those four things as much as I can. Again, because I know myself. I know that not only am I not fun to be around, I do not like the person I am when I'm doing those four things. So really simple. Just don't do those four things. I just eliminate them from my life. And my life is much more peaceful. And my heart is much more at peace. You know, it's interesting. We have a problem. The problem is this. The problem is that God is good. The problem is that Jesus has said that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly, right? That's John chapter 10, verse 10. I came that they may have life, that you might have life and have it to the full, have life abundantly. God also wants us to have joy. He says, I want my joy to be in you and your joy to be complete. So here's our problem. God is good and he wants us to have a fuller life than we want to have. He wants us to have more joy than we choose to have. He wants us to have more freedom than we have. He wants us to have more life than we have. That's a problem. And the problem is this. We have a tolerance problem. Because the fact that God is good, that's not a problem. The fact that God wants us to have an abundant life and have our joy to be complete, that's not a problem. Our problem is we have a tolerance problem. What I mean by that is we are often willing to tolerate the things that we know kill joy. We have in our lives, we're willing to tolerate things that we know are in our lives and they suffocate love. We have a problem. And the problem is we know exactly what it is that restricts our freedom. And in fact, even makes us slaves. And we're okay with tolerating those things that we know that if they stay, we'll be stuck. And we're okay with that. We're okay with tolerating those things that we know if they stay right there, then we're stuck. You might have heard about a man named Aaron Ralston. In 2003, Eric Ralston was about 27 years old. And the year before this, he had quit his job in order to go climb 14ers, right? 14,000 foot mountains. And in that same year, he got into canyoning. And you might hear a story because what happened was on one day he went out canyoning by himself and he didn't tell anyone where he was going, but he was in Utah. And at one point he was climbing down this rock as a 800-pound boulder shifted over and trapped his arm, his forearm, his hand, wrist, and forearm against the canyon wall. And he was there for 6 days. Here's his description about what happened. It's kind of funny. He said people asked him if it hurt, which is kind of maybe a dumb question, but I don't know. It'd be interesting. I don't want to actually have it experience it, so maybe I'll ask the question if it hurt. And he said, yeah, if you ever crushed your finger in a door accidentally, he said it was that times 100. And he said right away, in an adrenalized rage, for 45 minutes, he cursed like a pirate. Those first hour, all he did was just, curse like a pirate. And then it's interesting. He stopped himself. He was going to drink his water, but all he had was 1 liter of water. He had 2 burritos and he had a couple chunks of chocolate. And he realized, he didn't have a cell phone. I have no reception even if I did. He is trapped here. And it was one of those situations where he said, this is a stop and think and observe and plan phase of rational problem solving. I need to get into my rational brain and figure this out. Almost immediately, he ruled out the most drastic option, which is suicide. But the next most dramatic alternative appeared to him almost immediately. I might have to cut off my arm. Of course, for days, he didn't want to do this. In fact, he said this. He said, I started having this surreal conversation with myself. Here's his conversation. He said, Aaron, you're going to have to cut off your arm. He said, I don't want to cut my arm off. Dude, you're going to have to cut your arm off. And I said to myself, a little back and forth. And then he said, wait a minute, stop. I'm not talking to myself. That's crazy. You're not talking to yourself, Aaron. And for the next couple of days, he said he just talked to himself, trying to figure this thing out. After night number 5, on day 6, he realized what he had to do. And he took out his Leatherman tool and he punctured his arm. And at that point, I'm not going to go into the details. It was easy to cut open. But what happened was he couldn't cut through the bone. And so at some point, what he described as just complete rage, he realized that if he wrenched his arm against the boulder, he could break the bones in half. And so in this moment of rage on day 6, that's exactly what he did. And he got free. And he bandaged up his arm and he lived to tell the tale. He is now, 2003, he was 27. So here, whatever age he is now. And he lived, why? Because he realized, I'm stuck. And if I stay here, I will die. I'm stuck, and if I stay here, I'll die. In the gospel today, Jesus points out the fact that we are stuck. That there are things in our lives that cause us to be stuck. And so he says, okay, you find yourself stuck. If your hand causes you to sin, you're stuck, cut it off. Like Aaron Alston. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Now, here's an interesting thing. Jesus is not talking about actual amputation, literal amputation of the body. But what he's talking about is, he says that when we've discovered the thing that keeps us from him, and when we discover the thing, whatever that thing is, that keeps us from his love, that keeps us from freedom, that keeps us from joy, that keeps us from life, be ruthless with that thing. And whatever that thing is, the stakes are so high that when you discover whatever that thing is in our lives that we're willing to tolerate, that suffocate joy and keep us from Jesus, be ruthless with that thing. No matter what it costs. There's this book I read years ago by a man named Malcolm Gladwell, fascinating book called Outliers. And one of the stories he talks about is about the physicians, in fact, the one physician who decided to take on childhood leukemia. Up to this point, Gladwell points out that the history of this was deadly, essentially, right? Well, in the 1950s, there was this physician who determined to take the fight to leukemia. So he said this, this is a quote from the doctor. He said, one day you'd have a healthy child, and the next your child would come down with a fever and then start hemorrhaging over all parts of their body. And often physicians weren't even around in the leukemia ward. They wouldn't even go there because it was too depressing, because there was nothing they could do. In fact, nurses would finish their shifts with uniforms covered in blood. And the chemotherapy drugs had such horrific side effects and such low efficacy that not treating these children seemed to be the most humane option to the medical establishment. But there was this doctor who said, no, we have to be able to figure this out. And so what he did was he had this combination of 4 different kinds of chemotherapeutic drugs. And he began administering them to these patients, to these children. But these children, they had the response, right? You're trying to kill the cancer. In order to kill the cancer, you have to almost kill the child. And so the medical community was definitely against this, because you looked like you were causing the child to go through unspeakable and unnecessary and unhelpful pain. The physicians, they said that nights they would just pace back and forth outside the hospital rooms of these children who were dying of cancer, but it seemed like they were dying of the chemotherapy, just hoping they make it through the night. After years of this, after years of saving thousands and thousands of children with chemotherapy, through chemotherapy who had leukemia, in 1965, they published their results. And currently, this combination of chemotherapy is the standard, and the cure rates for childhood leukemia are somewhere north of 94%. Up to this point, leukemia would most likely be a death sentence. But there were these doctors who were saying, no, whatever it takes to get rid of the thing that is killing you, whatever it takes to get rid of the thing that is siphoning off life off these children, even if it hurts, it's willing to do. Again, in the gospel, Jesus is saying that keeping those things in our lives that are able to kill us, it steals joy. It steals us of freedom. It's a recipe for misery. That's the reality, of course. Keeping these things in our lives are a recipe for misery. Of course, we know this. And that's the thing is like, we know it. We know that most likely we can identify the things that lead us into sin. We all know the things that like, if I keep this in my life, I'm going to fall, whether or not, might not be today, but eventually it's going to be. And then we say, nah, it'll be fine. If I could rework a quote, there's a quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. When it comes to business, when it comes to like leading a company, all these kind of things, leading a culture. There's another quote I like to say. I would say, environment will eat willpower for breakfast. Because sometimes you say, no, I'll be fine. Like I'm going to keep this in my life and then I'm going to battle against it. Like in the moment of truth, like I'm going to really fight against this thing. No, environment. If we leave these things in our environment will eat willpower for breakfast. I heard this priest once say, he said, imagine if the devil sent you an invitation to join his rebellion. Imagine the devil was like, hey, I would love for you to be part of my rebellion against God. It will end in disaster. It will end in failure. It will end with your misery and being miserable and you're being separated from him forever. And you saw this invitation and you're like, I don't want to do this, but I'm not going to throw it away. I'll just put it on the fridge. Like that would be absolutely insane. Here's the invitation from the devil to join his rebellion against God that will end in failure. And I know I don't want this, but I'm going to keep it in my life. That's what we do. We know there are things that suffocate life. They suffocate joy in our lives. They steal happiness and they steal freedom. They keep us from loving God the way we even want to love God. And what we do is we tolerate those things. Say, it'll be fine. We were talking with a student. This happens with a bunch of things. Here's some examples. Alcohol. I remember talking to a student who had said, I know this. I went out the other night and I knew if I had that third beer, here's what would happen. And I had the third beer and that's what happened. So for some people, it's the third drink. For some people, it's the first drink. If you have a problem with alcohol, you know what they say? They say the first drink is too many and 1,000's never enough. But how many people who know they have a problem, they know that if they let this into my life, it's disaster. And yet at the same time, I'm not going to take steps against it. No, gambling might be another issue. So there might be 1,000 people who are completely fine gambling. Like they can play all the sports betting, they can play all the casinos, they can do whatever they want and then walk away from it, no problem. But if you realize this is robbing me of joy, this is robbing me of my life, this is robbing me of my finances, this is stealing my peace, then you know I have to eliminate that from my life. Sometimes it's relationships. Sometimes we know that we're keeping unnecessary and unhelpful relationships in our lives, like whether that be with coworkers, or I know that if I'm hanging out with these people, I start complaining. If I hang out with these people, I start gossiping, and I know that's what happens, and I don't avoid it. I allow them to stay in my life, and they don't have to be. Sometimes it happens with dating relationships. I don't know how many people I've talked to who've been dating someone or dating each other for a very, very long time. And they know after this point that they're not good for each other. Like they know they don't help each other. They don't build each other up. And yet it's one of those situations where it's like, well, we've been dating so long that I'll just stay. Meanwhile, there's life that's being suffocated. There is joy that's being suffocated, and even sometimes being led away from the Lord because of sin. And this is a bunch of different things, right? We can talk about music, how sometimes music doesn't affect people. Sometimes music really affects people. And you might be someone that you were like, years ago, I remember the story here on campus. There was a young man who loved listening to rage rock, this like really, really angry metal. And he was kind of an angry guy. Like he's all of these years here, he was pretty angry. And one of his friends, his female friends, was like, hey, I'm going to challenge you to not listen to that music for 2 weeks and see if you feel any better. And I may have mentioned this story before. He did it. After 2 weeks, she was like, how do you feel? He's like, I feel great. She says, are you going to not go back to listening to this? He's like, no, I'm going to start listening again. I made it my 2 weeks. He knew that listening to this kind of music made him angry. He didn't care. He knew what it was that was keeping him from joy, and it didn't matter. I mean, think about, oh my gosh, you guys, so many of us, we know that that little magical rectangle in our pocket steals joy. It steals time, it steals life, it sometimes even leads us to sin. I mean, I was thinking about how deadly some of that social media on our phone or on the computer can be. And deadly in the sense of like comparison. And there have been studies that have been abundantly clear that social media leads many, many people, especially young people, to depression, to having poor body image, to having decreased overall well-being, to have disordered eating. Like this is one of the things that happens to so many people, and yet we say, I have to keep it. I have to have it in my life. Other things that leading, like doom scrolling. How many times you heard this phrase? Like doom scrolling, where it's just like, I settle into scrolling. I'm reading all that. I need to know what's happening next. And pretty soon I look up and the world has passed me by. And it steals our lives. Sometimes the thing on that little rectangle or on the computer leads a person to lust. And we just keep holding on to it. Instead of like saying, I'm going to shut this down, I'm actually going to eliminate this. I'm going to cut this off, like Aaron Ralston and his arm. Like, if I stay here, I will be stuck. If I stay here, I will remain stuck. If I stay here, I'm going to die. Why do we keep holding on to these things? Especially when we know. Like, you don't need me to tell you what the thing is in your life that is keeping you from life. Why do we hold on to it? I think the reason is because we say, well, what if? Like, right? We say, no, I don't know. What if I need it? I know that alcohol isn't good to have in my home, but what if someone comes over to visit and they'll want something to drink? I know that having social media it toxifies my life, but maybe I'll need to reach out to someone and have some communication. I know that doom scrolling or listening to CNN or Fox or whatever the thing is constantly 24/7 is not good for me, but I need to know what's going on in the world. Why do we keep holding on to this? We have those what ifs. Also, we realize that it's difficult. It's difficult to cut off the thing that is killing us. And yet we all want freedom. We all want freedom. You have to realize that freedom often starts with restriction. I'll say it like this: restriction is the first step towards freedom. Restriction is the first step towards freedom. So go back to golf, of the games I like to avoid. There was a time, the last time I played golf, I didn't even play golf. It was this, my whole family was going out golfing, and I said, well, I'm not gonna play with you, I'll just walk with you on the course. My mom said, you can't do that, you can't, if you're not gonna play, you can't come. And I was like, well, then I'm not going. And then she caved and let me come. So we're walking the course, we get to the second to the last hole, and I'm like, well, just let me borrow your drive, someone's driver, let me borrow a ball. And I just teed up, didn't mean anything. Like, I'm not playing the game. I just wanna hit the ball one time. I hit it, massive slice, like into the woods, and instantly I was enraged. You guys, I realize this. You might say, Father, well, just don't be mad, be better. And I would say, thank you, you're not wrong. That I know that the problem for me isn't games. For me, the problem isn't golf, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. But the truth is, freedom begins with restriction, but doesn't end with it. Right? I can avoid the game. I still have the problem. That restriction is the first step towards freedom, but it's not the last step. The reason it's the first step is so that you can have some space, right? The reason why restriction is the first step is so you can have some room, because we realize, oh my gosh, I don't have that problem in my life anymore, but I have that problem in my heart right now. This is the reality. Restriction is the first step of freedom so that we can see accurately what our heart looks like. If I keep this thing in my life, I'll numb myself. I'll numb myself. I remember I have some close family and some friends who are in AA. They're in recovery, and it's it's amazing. But some of them have shared with me how when they went to their first meeting, someone would get up and say, "Hi, I'm Tom, and I'm a grateful alcoholic." And they've shared, and other people online have shared this too. They said, when I first heard that, I thought, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're a grateful alcoholic. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're grateful that you're an alcoholic. What an idiot. And it's one of those situations where sometimes we can think like, why would someone be, and here's these alcoholics who are like, how would you be a grateful alcoholic? And they realize over time that they were. Why? Because the moment they realized they had a problem and acknowledged they had a problem, well, the first step is take it away, right? The first step is cut off the alcohol. But there's a danger there. If that's all you do, the danger is you just become a dry drunk, right? You're not dealing with the underlying problem. I think for any addictive behavior, What we're trying to do is trying to numb something. It's the reason why people turn to alcohol. It's the reason why people turn to overwork. It's the reason why people turn to pornography or other sexual acting out. We're trying to numb something. What happens is you take that thing away, you cut it off, right? You get rid of it, and all of a sudden you have to feel something. Wow, there's anger there. There's frustration there. There's pain there. There's hopelessness there. There's sadness there. There's meaninglessness that I've been trying to numb this whole thing. That's the thing. I cut it off and I'm able to actually feel, and I might not want to feel, but that's the problem. We have restriction as the first step towards freedom, so you have the space to see it, like to deal with it. Once again, restriction is the first step towards freedom. I think saying that sounds a little bit like these three words. If you know of a man named Jocko Willink has a podcast, he has a company, he's a former Navy SEAL, and he has a three-word phrase, kind of a mantra that he repeats often. And that mantra is discipline equals freedom. And I think sometimes, in some ways, restriction, the first step towards freedom, can sound a little bit the same. It's kind of almost the same idea. Discipline equals freedom. And it can sound like I'm saying, you guys, what we need to do is we need some discipline. We need to knuckle down, get those white knuckles out there and just do the hard thing because it's the right thing to do. And I'm kind of saying that, but only kind of. Because it's not about doing the hard thing. It's not about beating yourself up. It's not about being a tough person. It's actually about love. I came across this definition of discipline or description of discipline not too long ago. It's a little bit longer, but here it goes. This person said this. He said, I found this on the internet, so it's not all bad. He said, everyone says discipline is so important, but they never want to tell you why. I'll tell you why discipline is so important. It is the strongest form of self-love. It's ignoring something you want right now for something better later on. Discipline reveals the commitment you have to your dreams, especially on days you do not want to. Then he said, the future you is depending upon the current you to keep the promises that you made to yourself yesterday. Imagine the future you. Future you is depending upon the present you to keep the promises you made to yourself yesterday. Imagine what your life could look like in 5 months. If you made that decision, I'm going to cut this off. I don't need this in my life. It is suffocating me. If I stay here, I'll be stuck. And if I stay stuck, I'm going to die. We know that every one of us has things in our lives that we tolerate that they are suffocating God's love. They're suffocating joy. They're keeping us from the Lord. The invitation is close the door. Cut it off. And I don't mean do the hard thing when the hard thing's hard to do. I mean, do the hard thing when the hard thing's easy to do. We realize this. We know ourselves, right? We know that, no, I'll wait till the moment of truth, and then I'll rise to the challenge. No, we won't. The idea is this. The idea is cut it off now, today, in this moment, so that when you get to the moment of temptation, it's not even an option. That's the beautiful thing about all of this. Restriction is the first step towards freedom, but I have to decide today for the sake of tomorrow. This is almost the last thing. I mentioned last week C.S. Lewis a bunch of times, maybe twice. I also mentioned one of my favorite books from him called The Great Divorce. And The Great Divorce, as I mentioned last week, is the difference between heaven and hell. So here's C.S. Lewis, and he goes to the plains of heaven. He leaves hell, goes to the plains of heaven, and he realizes that they're all ghosts, right? They're all kind of insubstantial. They're people that are stretched too thin, but they're being invited by either saints or by angels to leave behind whatever is holding them in hell and to race off to heaven. And I don't want to spoil the book, but no one says yes. Everyone is met by an angel. They're met by a saint. And they're like, please let go of whatever it is killing you and dragging you down. And they're not willing to cut it off. They're not willing to let go. They're not willing to shut the door, except for one being, one person, one ghost. And it's an incredible depiction of this. Here's this ghost, and he has a little red lizard on his shoulder. And he's speaking with this angel. And the red lizard is essentially a spirit of lust. And the angel's saying, hey, can I kill this? Come with me. Let me kill it and come with me. The man says, well, you don't want to kill it. I mean, maybe if it goes to sleep, then maybe that's fine, but it'd be so weird if you just killed it. Like, what would I be like? What would I be left as? What would happen to me if you killed this thing? Meanwhile, the lizard's whispering in his ear and saying like, no, I'll be really nice. I'll treat you nicely. I know I've gone too far sometimes, but from now on, if you let me stay, if you let me live, I'll only give you like sweet dreams, nothing too extreme. And finally, this man is so desperate because he's had this lizard on his shoulder. He's been holding on to this thing that has kept him from Jesus for so long that finally, as he weeps, as the angel is saying, can I kill it? But he says this, he says, if you kill it, you're going to kill me. And he says, no, I'm not going to kill you. He says, well, it hurts. He said, I didn't say it wouldn't hurt. I said it wouldn't kill you. And finally, the man says, God, help me. Please, yes, just do it. Get rid of it. Shut the door. Take it off. Kill it. And the angel reaches out his burning hand, grabs this lizard, breaks its back, throws it to the ground, and the man even says, I'm done for. He says, I'm dead. And then Lewis describes what happened to the man, to the ghost. And this is the part, this is the piece that says, okay, imagine what future you would say to current you if current you would keep the promises you made. Here's what happens. It says, for a moment, he's looking at the ghost. I could make out nothing distinctly. And then I saw between me and the nearest bush, unmistakably solid, but growing every moment solider, the upper arm and shoulder of a man. Then brighter and still and stronger still, in legs and hands, the neck and golden head materialized while I watched. And if my attention had not wavered, I should have seen the actual completing of a man, an immense man, naked and not much smaller than the angel. What distracted me was the fact that at the same moment, something seemed to be happening to the lizard. At first, I thought the operation had failed, so far from dying, the creature was still struggling and even growing bigger. As it struggled, and as it grew, it changed. Its hinder parts grew rounder, the tail, still flickering, became a tail of hair that flickered between huge and glossy hindquarters. Suddenly, I started back, rubbing my eyes. What stood before me was the greatest stallion I've ever seen. Silvery white, but with a mane and tail of gold. It was smooth and shining, rippled, and with swells of flesh and muscle, whinnying and stamping with its hooves. And each stamp, the land shook and the trees dindled. And then the new-made man turned and clapped the new horse's neck. It nosed his bright body. Horse and master breathed into each other's nostrils. The man turned from it, flung himself at the feet of the burning one, and embraced his feet. When he rose, I thought his face shone with tears, but it may have only been the liquid love and brightness which flowed from him. I had not long to think about it. In joyful haste, the young man leaped upon the horse's back. Turning in his seat, he waved farewell, and then nudged the stallion with his heels. They were off before I knew what was happening. There was riding, if you like. I came out as quickly as I could from among the bushes and followed them with my eyes, but already they were only like a shooting star, far off on the green plain, and soon among the foothills of the mountains, and then still like a star, I saw them winding up, scaling what seemed impossible steeps, and quicker every moment, until they neared the dim brow of the landscape, so high that I must strain my neck to see them. They vanished, bright themselves, into the rose brightness of that everlasting morning. What Lewis is describing here is what your life could look like. You just have the courage to say, okay, that's it. You just have the courage to say, I know God has made me for freedom. I know He's made me for joy. I know He's made me for love. I will cut off in my life whatever keeps me from love. I will be ruthless about it. But it's going to take courage. The first step towards freedom is restriction. It's going to take courage because what's going to happen is even after you've cut these things off, you're still going to be the same person. Because it's the first step. It's not the last. And the truth is, you might never be done in this life. But that's no reason to be discouraged. Think about a farmer or a gardener. They go out, they're growing crops. They go out and they have to weed. A farmer or a gardener, they're never discouraged. They're never shocked when weeds come back. They know what they have to do. They know what it is to grow good crops. It means I come back to it and I pull them up again. You are made for freedom. God has destined you for love. God has destined you for life. He came that you might have life and have it to the full. So be ruthless with your environment. Take the first steps. And restriction is the first step towards freedom.